dedicated to the memory of Corporal Charles McMahon and Corporal Darwin Judge and all the past and present members of the Marine Security Guards.
Across America and around the world, welcome to America's #1 Veterans Radio program, Veterans Radio. And now, here's your host for today, Dale Throneberry.
Good morning, America, and welcome to Veterans Radio on a beautiful day here in Michigan and all across the country. We've got a great program for you. We're going to be talking about the fall of Saigon and the last men out. It's a new book coming out, I believe, probably today, authored by Bob Drury and Tom Clavin, and we're going to be having them on after our first break. And we got pictures on the webcast. If you're interested in looking at that, just go to Veterans Radio and click on Watch Us Live. It's going to be... I found it a rather fascinating book. I was talking to a friend this morning. Actually, I was talking to Gary this morning, and I was saying after I read it that was a part of my life that I had blocked out because April 30th, 1975 is when the last helicopter flew off the top of the United States Embassy and ended our involvement in Vietnam. It's a really strong story. Running our board this morning is our air boss, Bob Gould. Good morning, Bob.
Airborne all the way.
And we've got a number of other people hiding out back there. Gary Lilly is going to be running the photos through the webcast.
CB's can do.
And Kai is back there running all of our music and everything else.
How's it doing this morning over there?
We're doing just fine. Radio is great. Live radio is amazing. We come right up to the last second. Oh, this isn't working. There it goes. Okay, it's working now. So we're going to be doing that. I'm going to go right into our first break here in just a moment. Get ready for it. And we're going to be coming back. We're going to be talking with Bob Drury and Tom Clavin and Steve Schuller about the last men out, the last helicopter off the roof of the embassy in Saigon on 30th of April, 1975. We'll be right back. Vietnam is the topic today, and we're going to be talking about the last aircraft out of Vietnam and the last Marines off the roof of the embassy. And we're going to be talking with the authors of the book, The Last Men Out, which I can show you on the webcast here. And first, joining me on the line are the authors. And first of all, we're going to have Bob Drury and Tom Clavin. And Bob and Tom, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Good morning, Mr. Throneberry. I believe you're talking to me, but we have a really bad connection. I'm sorry. I just seem to have lost you.
Okay, well, we'll give you a call back. Why don't you hang up and we'll give you a call right back. Right? So who's left on the line? Not Tom? You still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Tom. We're going to be calling Bob back to get him on the line. But I wanted to welcome you to Veterans Radio.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us on.
And it should be. I'm hoping it's... you've written a number of other books, and you currently write. Are you still contributing to the New York Times?
No, I haven't for a few years, mostly because of focusing on book work.
Okay. I'm sorry I wasn't able to do my homework this morning. We had a couple of technical glitches here.
Sure.
Tell me some of the other books that you've been involved with.
Well, there's a book that I did last year that was a biography of the baseball player Roger Maris.
Right.
And, some people remember him as not only with the New York Yankees, but he had a few successful years with the St. Louis Cardinals also. And that one is actually the paperback version of that is just from coming out. And then Bob and I have collaborated on two previous books. One was called Halsey's Typhoon, which is a World War II story. And then we followed that with a book called Last Stand of Fox Company, which is about a company of Marines in the Korean War.
Okay, well, we're going to have to talk about that, because I remember reading Halsey's Typhoon. I said, this is something we need to talk about on the air, so we need to get a hold of you.
Yeah, and actually there's a connection, when we get Bob back on the line, but there's a connection between Halsey's Typhoon and how the Last Man Out book actually, the original concept for it came about.
Okay, we've got Bob back on the line. Bob, welcome back to Veterans Radio.
Throneberry again. I'm sorry about that. I am back on the line, yes.
That's right. Are you in New Jersey?
Yes, I am.
In Manasquan?
I am. Do you know it?
I was born in Spring Lake.
Oh, the Irish Riviera, eh?
Yeah, well, Spring Lake Heights, it didn't count at that time.
Close enough.
It is very close. Thank you very much. No, my aunt lived on Church Street in Manasquan. Sorry, everybody, got to do a little reminiscing back here.
We're right up the street from Church Street.
Okay. It's a great place to be from.
I'll say a prayer for you tomorrow, sir.
Yes. I was just talking with Tom about the other books that you've collaborated on, and I wanted to ask. I'll start off with you, Bob, about what made you decide to write this story.
Well, in my day job, so to speak, I work for Men's Health magazine, and I'm downrange a lot. I've been in Iraq a half a dozen times. I've been in Afghanistan, Darfur, Sarajevo, Belfast, all these beautiful places. And I was talking to a Marine security guard at one point, and he just happened to mention this story that kind of floated around their inner circle. And I had never heard. I mean, we all knew the iconic photos of the bug out from Saigon, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But I had never heard the inside story, and I got curious about it, and I mentioned it to Tom, who is just. I got to tell you, Dale, I'm a pretty good researcher. But if you threw me in the Library of Congress or the National Archives or the Jerry Ford Museum, you'd have to come and get me in about 6 months with a miner's light on your hat. Whereas Tom goes into these places and he just finds he finds the nub of the story, and he did some research and he said, "Did you know?" Now I don't want to give away the ending of the book, but he said, "Did you know this happened?" And I said, "No, I had no idea." And whether it was Halsey's Typhoon, whether it was The Last Stand of Fox Company, or now with Last Man Out, Tom and I guess you would say our MOS is we like to take stories that have ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances.
Well, and
these were certainly extraordinary circumstances for these Marine security guards that were trapped in Saigon in 1975.
Absolutely, and that's a line that we use all the time as we tell stories about ordinary people who have done extraordinary things. And Tom, tell me a little bit about the Marine Security Guard. I wasn't that familiar with him.
Well, I just want to interject something just to add to something that Bob said. Your show is everybody across the country can hear it, but you're in Michigan, and that there's a connection there to Last Man Out, because when our first book came out, Halsey's Typhoon, we were both on book tours, but we went separately to different parts of the country, and one of my stops was at the Gerald Ford Museum in Grand Rapids, and where they have the stairway, so from the last day of Saigon, the stairway that was used to climb up onto the roof and get those people onto the helicopter from the iconic photograph. And I remember, being taken on a tour there, and for those people that are not familiar with the Gerald Ford Library in Ann Arbor and the museum in Grand Rapids there, they're really wonderful places and a great staff out there. And I remember being taken around a little bit and somebody saying, there's a really good story involved in the fall of Saigon. And I immediately said, oh yeah, I know it. Just like we all sort of know the story. And actually it turned out that we didn't. Bob and I went on this voyage of discovery to find out that there's a lot we certainly did not know about the last day in Saigon. And so, by doing some research and talking to the people involved, and I, as Bob will point out too, the gentlemen we got to meet and talk to, who were actually involved in the last day, Marine security guards were really generous with their time and with their recollections, and obviously, this book wouldn't exist if they were not so generous with their recollections. Well,
I was talking with your publicist yesterday. And after I had read the book, I said it was a time period. I had blocked that whole time out, intentionally or unintentionally. I didn't even think about it. But as I read the book and read about all of the screw-ups that were going on and the miscommunications, it just got me more and more upset about our exit from Vietnam, because the real story in here, of course, is the Marine detachment there, the last 11 guys to get off the roof. But the side stories are all of the interagency conflicts and bullying and not talking to anybody and trying to save face and so on and so forth. That it really
deception. I mean, the CIA was deceiving. Yeah.
And I've got Steve Schuller on the line. I just want to bring him on for just a second. Steve, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hey, glad to be here.
I'm sure you're glad to be anywhere, right?
Really, especially today.
When we go back and we look at those that the picture, and when you first read the book, Steve, when I talked to you, Steve was on the roof that last day. You were a Marine on the roof on April 30th of 1975. What was going through your mind at that time?
Peace. The only thing you could remember was how peaceful and quiet looking over the whole city was. There was no one moving, nothing going on. It was an eerie feeling because you didn't know what the heck was going on, but you knew something was going on, and it was just a quiet little moment that you didn't know what was going to happen and when.
Well, that's for sure, and you guys were very brave. I'm going to ask you to hold on the line, Steve, when we get back to you and talk more about what was actually happening to you at the time. But I want to come back. We're talking with the authors of Last Men Out, Bob Drury and Tom Clavin, and to kind of give you a historical perspective of what was happening in Saigon at the time, the United States Marines, or the official government deployment, I guess, of where people were, is that they were evacuating people, weren't they?
Yes, they were. There was the Operation Frequent Wind. What's that?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom. You take it.
Yeah, Operation Frequent Wind was the name of the operation that was evacuating people, and the epicenter of that was the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. And what they set up was there's actually two places. There was the DAO compound by the airport, or in the airport, and then there was a landing spot set up, a couple of landing spots in the embassy compound. And so the American personnel were being evacuated. There were a lot of Vietnamese civilians who were being evacuated. And it was the job of the Marine security guards to sort of basically provide that security and as efficiently as possible, get the helicopters down, landed, get people on the helicopters, get them to take off. Okay, next helicopter in. It was hour after hour of exhausting work to try and get as many people as possible out of there, because they didn't know at any moment that the North Vietnamese troops were going to enter the city and shut everything down.
Well, Mr. Thornberry Drury here.
Yeah.
I'm sure the humble Steve Schuller will disagree, but I have to add that in the total confusion, in the total the breakdown of communications, the deception that you mentioned earlier, it was the MSGs, the Marine Security Guards, who more or less acted as the rock. They more or less took control and said, even though there were people higher on the food chain, so to speak, the ambassador's staff, it was the MSG contingent that just said, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to get as many people out as we can, and this is how we're going to take control of the situation. And I'm sure Sergeant Schuller is blushing as he listens to me say this, but he failed to mention to you that when he was on that roof, he had a bayonet wound in his side.
Right, that's right.
And he's too humble to mention that, but I thought I would bring that up.
Well, I was going to get to that, but I think it's so important. Is we got to remember that we had promised the Vietnamese that if the North invaded, that we were going to go to their rescue, or we were going to go help them. And we didn't, unfortunately. And the NVA that was coming down all the way from I Corps all the way through, and there had already been one evacuation out of Da Nang that had gone kaflooey, it sounded like. And this general, the NVA general, what's his name?
General Dung.
Yeah, General Dung.
Unfortunately named General Dung.
Right, yes. But he had Saigon surrounded, didn't he?
He had 150,000 troops. They had washed through the Republic of Vietnam as if they opened the sluices to a dam. And I tell you what, there's another book to be written. Tom and I, in our setup, alluded to this, actually mentioned it. But why the Paris Peace Accords allowed North Vietnam to keep 130,000 troops across the DMZ in the Republic of Vietnam after those papers were signed, I'll never know.
Right.
And when they decided to break the Paris Peace Accords and they swept down, General Dung, who was a master strategist and a master tactician, he did not he expected more of a fight. Mm-hmm. He had told his superiors at the Hanoi Politburo that they would probably take Saigon in 1976. Right. He didn't expect to just run through South Vietnam and encircle Saigon the way he did. And I think it was a shock to everybody. It was certainly a shock to President Ford and to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and to Ambassador Graham Martin. And as I said, I keep coming back to this, but the more that we speak about this, the more you just remind me that it was the MSGs, the Marine Security Guards. They were pretty much the only people that kept their heads.
Well, that was Major Keane. correct?
That was Major Keene, correct. I'm sure Steve Schuller could speak to Major Keene much better than Tom or I.
We're going to get to him, too. I'm trying to set this picture because there were a number of different stories going on at the same time. You had the airport up at Benoit Tonsanut that was rocketed, so therefore it was useless. And Operation Frequent Wind ended up with the helicopters, which was something like Plan E.
Option 4.
And and that they decided that they were going to take these people out by helicopter, and there weren't enough of them, and there wasn't enough time.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It was just mass confusion. And when the Marines came in, a company of Marines came in from the 7th Fleet and landed at, we should mention that the DAO stands for Defense Attaché's Office, and that was kind of a U.S., it was an extension. It was about 6 miles away from the embassy, but it was almost an extension of the embassy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the Marines from the fleet flew into, and there were simultaneous evacuations going on, both from the airport, the DAO was attached to the airport, and the embassy. And finally, by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they had cleared out everyone from the DAO, and that left the embassy as kind of the Alamo of Saigon.
Well, we're going to get to that in just a minute. We're talking with the authors of Last Men Out, Bob Drury, Tom Clavin, and Steve Schuller, who was there. And this is a book that, for Vietnam veterans especially, and for history buffs, this is something you need to read because it's going to come up with more questions that you just never knew about. If you want to get in on this conversation on Veterans Radio, give us a call here at 877-573-7825. That's 877-573-7825. I wanted to talk just briefly about what was going on south of Saigon at the same time because I thought this was a really interesting story down in Can Tho, which was in 4 Corps for civilians and for people that were in there, with aptly named McNamara.
Tom, take her away.
Tom, tell me about McNamara. And Hasty, too.
McNamara is kind of a little bit of maybe you could say a larger-than-life character. He was, I believe at the time, he was in his late 40s. He was a veteran diplomat. He had postings at places all around the world. He knew his business, but he was also kind of a bon vivant. I think when Sergeant Hasty first encountered him, he had a drink in one hand and a lady friend in the other. He was somebody who enjoyed things, but he also was very serious, very smart guy. Excuse me, and he knew, that he couldn't depend on the plans that were already in place in case the North Vietnamese suddenly rushed towards Can Tho and Saigon. So he sort of had this ad hoc little flotilla at the ready. Sergeant Hasty was he called him sort of like a John Wayne. He was only 24 years old at the time, but somewhat inexperienced Marine. He later on in his career got a lot of experience all around the world. But they together put this little flotilla together and put several hundred Vietnamese civilians on there, and they started down the river. And because they were supposed to have helicopters that were going to take them out of there, but when they found out that the CIA took them,
right.
And so they were left kind of stranded. And they started down the river and had quite the adventure to reach the open sea, which included being stopped by Vietnamese, being fired upon, going through a gauntlet of fire, and that's again a story that a lot of people wouldn't know about the last couple of days of Saigon. That this little impromptu fleet saved several hundred Vietnamese lives, including to a contingent of Marines and the council there, McNamara, and I'm very happy to say that Council McNamara is alive and well and lives in the Washington D.C. area.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and again, I encourage our listeners to go out and get this book. It's called Last Men Out. There are so many different subplots going on inside of it. I think you'll find it just absolutely riveting to me about McNamara and Hasty going down the river, being shot at by the friendlies and the bad guys.
Yeah, both sides.
Because everybody's. I mean, you could certainly understand the Vietnamese being a little upset. Hey, you guys said you were going to take us out, and now you're not.
And pirates, and they encountered pirates also. I remember when I first interviewed, it was a Colonel Hasty by then. He was just back from Afghanistan, and he said, well, let me see, my list of things to worry about as we were floating down. It was about a 70-mile run, a 4-hour run. It turned out to last much longer, if you've read the book, you know this. And he said, I was worried about, I guess, the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, the South Vietnamese turning on us, currents, pirates, weather, and shoals, in that order, and we hit every one of them.
Yeah. And then they popped out into the South China Sea with the promise that a ship would be there to pick them up, and it wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
Correct. What an adventure. Their own Terry McNamara's pirate fleet. Terry and the Pirates. That's what we called it.
Absolutely. I certainly. I just wanted to mention that story to him. And as you mentioned that it was, I believe it was Sergeant Hasty at the time.
Yes.
And then we have a picture up on the webcast of him shooting at somebody with an M60 machine gun.
Right. Well, they had just been stopped by the South Vietnamese who boarded. They didn't know what was going on, and the South Vietnamese allegedly were looking for draft age Vietnamese that they weren't going to let escape. But in truth, they were very, very angry at any American who was leaving the country after the promises we had made. And what happened was Terry McNamara, the consul at Canton, had the foresight. He demanded that the patrol boat captain, demanded that he speak to his superior. So they were hauled up for like 2 hours in the middle of the river. Finally, the superior, the Commodore, got there, and Terry McNamara threw his arm around him and said, remember 3 weeks ago when I got your wife and your children and your entire family out of South Vietnam and over to Guam? And the Commodore, the South Vietnamese Commodore, just kind of sheepishly smiled and said, yes, sir, I remember that very well. You're free to go on your way.
It's not, right, that's always who you know.
Yes, exactly. We expected, as Hasty said, the way that Hasty had his hand, he had his safety off, he had his M16 in a burlap bag, and he was ready to start. There were six other Marine security guards from Canton on this little flotilla, this little pirate fleet, and he had his M16 in a burlap bag, and he was, are we going to shoot it out here with our ostensible allies, our former allies? And the next thing you know, he sees Terry McNamara with his arm around the Commodore's shoulder, chatting, and he said, I was waiting for somebody to break out champagne flutes.
Well, we always look at the humor in these events, especially when we survive them. It's much, much better that way. Let's go back into Saigon, and Tom, I'm going to bring you on to talk about the idea of what was going on around the embassy at the time. End of April, there are no airline flights going out any longer. It's all done by helicopter. What is the embassy like?
Well, what the big challenge the Marine security guards faced was to try and maintain order in the midst of surrounding chaos. The embassy had sent out. There were Marines and other personnel manning these buses going out into the city to try and pick up American personnel and press reporters. The Vietnamese who were told they were going to be able to be transported out of the city, out of the American embassy compound, and so there were these buses trying to get through these streets that were choked with people. You had Vietnamese soldiers who were very scared because they knew that everything was over, and they were just firing randomly into the air. They were stealing clothing and taking off their uniforms off and putting on civilian clothes, hoping that they would go undetected when the North Vietnamese came in. There were just traffic jams. There were a lot of people just wandering around, not knowing what was going to happen. As it turned out, when the North Vietnamese troops entered the city, there were not these mass slaughters, but people feared that that's what was going to happen, that literally thousands of civilians were just going to be put up against walls and shot. And so the American embassy was supposed to be kind of like the eye of the hurricane. As time went on, there were thousands of people who gathered around the embassy, pressing against the gates. They could see the helicopters coming in and landing, picking people up and taking them off, and there was all these hopes that they would be part of that evacuation. And as time went on, they realized their hopes started to diminish. It was replaced by anger, and the Marine security guards had to, be worried about at what point might there be some kind of coordinated effort to just break through into the compound, and once that was done, the evacuation would come to a close. So every minute was tense because you really didn't know what might happen the very next minute. And at one point there was, Bob mentioned before about Sergeant Schuller having a bayonet wound, and he could, I'm sure remember that very clearly what happened, but they were trying to get somebody into the compound, and the gates opened a little bit, and some people poured through, and that was a real shaky moment because they were able to get the gates closed again. If not, and the sea of humanity could have poured into the embassy, and that would have put everything to a stop.
There were also heartbreaking moments, Mr. Thornberry. I just thought I'd throw that in. I remember the MSGs telling us about elderly soldiers coming up and showing old yellowed letters saying, Mr. Na served the Republic of Vietnam and the United States of America very well, but he didn't have the right papers to get into the embassy. John Gillane told us about he was lifting people over the gate, and men were coming up to him and showing him bags full of jewels and bags full of gold Krugerrands. Get me in, please get me in. And all the MSGs that we spoke to just felt so horrible about playing God, that they felt they were playing God. You can come, you can't. You can come, you can't. You have the right papers, you don't. And it was just a horrible, horrible decision that they had to make.
There were so many decisions in reading in the book, and we're talking with the authors of Last Man Out and Sergeant Steve Schuller, who was there, and we're going to talk with Steve after we take our next break. I want to talk about some of the incidents, including your meeting with that bayonet through the fence. But if you want to get in on the conversation, give us a call here at 877-573-7825. We're talking about the last day in Saigon, the last helicopters off the top of the embassy, and I can say that I landed on that embassy myself when I was there, and it's not a very big landing pad. So we're going to talk
about. Where did you fly, Dale?
I flew Hueys.
What kind of bird did you fly?
I flew Hueys. And we'll be right back after this message. You're listening to Veterans Radio. I love listening to that old music. We're talking with the authors of Last Men Out, the true story of America's heroic final hours in Vietnam. We're talking with Bob Drury and Tom Clavin, and also Sergeant Steve Schuller. And I want to bring Steve onto the program. Steve, they alluded to what happened to you when you let somebody in. Can you tell me what your remembrance of that is?
Yeah, about 20 minutes before that, Top Valdez came up to me. I was up on the roof burning, and he tapped a couple
You were burning documents. We have to fill our audience in. They were trying to burn every document that they could find at that point, correct?
Correct. That had been a 2-week project. We had started 2 or 3 weeks before all of this. There was just tons of classified information that had to be shredded and burned.
Including money.
Including, at one point, including a few $1 million they came up with. They had to destroy. They couldn't get out.
So, all right. So you've been doing that for 2 weeks. Now you're coming off the roof and you're down by the fence. What happened?
Right. Everybody got rotated up and did a tour up on the burn detail. So Top Valdez came by and tapped a few guys on the shoulders and told us to go down by the CRA gate, which were, at the time, the crowd was building, and there were a lot of Americans, mostly secretaries or employees of the different government agencies, that were trying to get through the crowd. And you could see the American passport, so they were trying to pluck them out of the crowd to get into the compound. And at one point, they had to open the gate. There were several of them. And the Marines just came out and pushed out and made like a V formation, like another typical riot formation. Mm-hmm. And they got the people in, and as they were closing it up, coming back in, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this motion, and to the right of me was Sergeant Bennington. Apparently there was some Arvin that was just grunted, that just charged through the crowd with a bayonet on his rifle, and at the very last second, I saw him out of the corner of my eye, but Sergeant Bennington saw him before I did and hit him with his rifle. And he got me about, the tip of his bayonet just barely penetrated me, but he got me, and the guy went flying back, and they just pulled the formation back in and closed the gate back up. And I think that was the last time that we were authorized to actually open the gate. And then the Marines started standing on other Marine shoulders, trying to lean over the top of the gate and to pull people up through it.
There were a lot of examples in the book. You guys do a great job of, telling us what was happening at the time, but I mean, they were passing people over, they were throwing kids over.
They were throwing babies over. It was, it was desperate. It was desperation on everyone's behalf there. It was just total chaos.
I can't even imagine how chaotic that must have been. And I'm sure that's something that you live with every single day.
Yeah.
I would think. Can you tell me, any of you, jump in here? I just want to talk briefly and make sure that we talk about Corporal Charles McMahon and Corporal Judge that were up at the DAO. Would like to talk about them for a second.
Take it away, Tom.
Well, they were two young, very young men who were somewhat inexperienced, and when they got to the Saigon, Sergeant Juan Valdez, who's a major character in the book, he sent them out to the airport, thinking that maybe that's a safer place for them. He certainly didn't want to take a chance of putting them in harm's way. And but unfortunately, what happened is on the morning of April 29th, the North Vietnamese began to do some shelling of the airport. Excuse me. And what happened was that one of their shells hit the guardhouse or where they were stationed, and they were both killed instantly. So, and as it turned out, they were the last two American troops killed in Vietnam. There was actually a couple of subsequent deaths later that night because there was a helicopter that went down. That was part of the evacuation operation that killed a couple of guys. But that was to this day, and Sergeant Schuller could certainly speak to this, but I went to a year ago. There was a 35th anniversary reunion of the MSGs at Quantico, and what the number of them were talking about is the remorse they still feel to this day about the deaths of those two young men, and especially since they were sort of newbies. It wasn't like they were grizzled veterans, and there was the effort was made to try and protect them a bit and not put them in harm's way, and then. Just a great misfortune that particular North Vietnamese shell hit that particular spot at that particular time.
That was the irony of ironies, Dale. At one point, the Ambassador Martin, ordered Top Valdez and Major Keene to split their MSG deployment, and they wanted a couple dozen, 16, 18 MSGs out at the DAO to stand security. And neither Keene nor Valdez thought that this was a good idea. They both knew what was coming down the road, and they said, as soon as we split this unit up, we're never going to see those guys again, meaning that they would have to get out on their own. But since it was an order from the State Department, and the MSGs took their orders from the State Department, unlike any other unit in the Marine Corps, they were under the aegis of civilians. He said, okay, well, listen, I'm going to send my most inexperienced hands down to the airport, because if the North Vietnamese really want us out of this country, there's no way they're going to shell the airport. Mm-hmm. And Charles McMahon in particular had only been in country for 1 week, and Darwin Judge had been in country for several weeks. And they said, well, get rid of these guys. Send them down the airport. They'll be safer down the airport. And the next thing you know, a rocket killed them both.
Well, I know that there's an association for the last survivors of Saigon. One of you want to tell our audience what the website might be? Because I found a lot of information on there myself.
Yeah, I would recommend, this is Tom speaking, I would recommend that people go to the fallofsaigon.org and spell just as it sounds, fallofsaigon.org, and there is a Fall of Saigon Association that runs it, and it's got a lot of information on there. It's got photographs, it's got actual letters that were sent by President Ford and Secretary of State Kissinger and others. You could see a photograph of Major James Keene. And many of the other MSGs who were there in Saigon and were in the last helicopters to leave, and it also has a scholarship fund for both McMahon and Judge that the Fall of Saigon Association runs, and so I think that'd be good if people found out more about that.
Go to the fallofsaigon.org, and we'll try to get that up on our website. I want to go back to Steve right now. Steve, tell me about Major Keene. Tell me about him. He seems like a fascinating man.
He was. I would not have been in his shoes, but he was probably one of the best commanding officers you could ask for. And it was hard, but he demanded a lot, but there was a lot on his shoulders, and when he told you to do something, you went over and you did it, and you kept doing it until he came back and told you not to.
He was running around the whole time in a golf shirt, wasn't he?
He had flown. He was actually stationed in Hong Kong. On the Marine Security program, you only see an officer twice a year.
Oh, all right.
They come up for semi-annual inspections, to do the PFT, all your Marine Corps written tests you have to take, the refreshers, and then they run you through the evacuation plans of the MSC. it's a 3-day inspection, and they do it twice a year. So when he received this phone call, he happened to be in Hong Kong at the time, and all he did was just grab a couple of items, got on a plane, and flew into Saigon, and he was there for a while. And we didn't change. Yeah, what he had on his back is what he wore for several weeks.
I know that things get rather testy and odorific, I guess, could be the term that you might want to use with that. You had all of these people crammed into the embassy. Bob, I'm going to go back to you. And the ambassador really kind of kept procrastinating. What did he hope for? Why did he not get people out sooner?
He was almost like a Lear character, a King Canute raging against the tides. He thought that he was the only man that could get the North Vietnamese to sit down at the negotiating table, and so an orderly transition could be made. And he was a sick man. He was physically sick. He was walking around. He had walking pneumonia. He had injuries from an old car, a car collision. He was on medications. He just did not look good, and the officers around, the military people around him, both in Saigon and on the 7th Fleet, eventually started to wonder, what is with Ambassador Martin? What's going on? What does he think he can accomplish by procrastinating, by not calling for this evacuation sooner? I mean, the North Vietnamese, they're giving us a calling card. They're shelling the airport. They're going to start shelling the city any moment. What does Martin think he's doing? And I would say that he did have good intentions, but they were just misplaced. And he was, towards the end, I think a lack of sleep, the medications he was on, his injuries, his walking pneumonia, it turned him a bit delusional, where he thought that if he could just get the right man on the phone, or if Kissinger could just buy him some more time, or if the new president of South Vietnam, Big Min, could be in contact with the Politburo in Hanoi, Martin could step in and kind of save the day for the South Vietnamese. Now, I want to say, underlying this delusion that I'm calling it was a sense of honor, was a sense that we have promised these people that we are their allies, that if the North invades, we will back them up. And he had that in the back of his mind the entire time. So it wasn't quite that he was just stark raving mad. It was he was trying to act on this honor, but everyone around him knew it was just too late to act on that, and we got to get out of here.
Well, he was talking to Washington. Washington was talking to someone. Kissinger's talking to Ford. President Ford, I guess, had made the executive decision that we just need to get out of here. Correct.
And in fact, it was kind of a ruse. Jerry Berry, the 46 pilot, the Sea Knight that landed on the roof, he pretended that he had written orders from the President Ford that Ambassador Martin must depart, and he wouldn't leave the roof. He wouldn't fly off the roof of his helicopter until he had Martin aboard. Yeah, and, of course, he did not have written orders. He just kind of had jotted something down on a piece of paper. And but at that point, it was just so, as Steve says, it was just so chaotic that anything went. And Jerry Berry was ordered to get the ambassador out of there, and by hook or by crook, and he got him out by hook.
That's true. We're coming up on another break, and we'll be right back. We're going to finish this up. We're talking with the authors of Last Men Out, the story of the last day in Saigon. You're listening to Veterans Radio. We'll be right back. I don't know what you want to call it. Anthem, I guess you could say, of the Vietnam War. We're talking with the authors of Last Men Out, Bob Drury, Tom Clavin, Sergeant Steve Schuller, who was there at the time, and we're going to kind of finish it up here because this program seems to run out of time so quickly. Bob, I'm going to go back to you for just a second. So let's repaint this picture a little bit about the embassy the last flights are out, the ambassador is finally gone. What's next?
Well, there's a contingent of Marine security guards and a platoon of Marines have landed at the embassy once the DAO has been evacuated over by the airport. So now you just have the embassy. It's the last bastion, a little island of, well, I can't even say it was an island of sanity, an island of safety in a chaotic city. The city there's plumes of smoke all over the city. There's looters. There's firefights. There's a few ARVN troops, South Vietnamese troops still holding out. And here we are in this, it was not calm, but it was probably the calmest place in Saigon. So at one point, Major Keane says, all right, there's still evacuees. That was the hardest thing for these MSGs. There were still several hundred, 400 or 500 evacuees inside the embassy compound, but they have orders from the 7th Fleet. We're only sending in 16 more helicopters. Keane does a quick head count. He realizes That's going to take the entire American contingent out. So he orders Top Valdez, shut her down. So all the Marines, they kind of form a semicircle, and they start backing into the Chancery, the main building of the embassy. When they get there, suddenly a lull comes over the crowd. The crowd has just been yelling in chaos, and suddenly it's silent. And it takes the crowd about 10 seconds to realize they're leaving without us.
This is it.
And the Marines get into the embassy. They start running up the stairs. They disable the elevators. They run up the stairs. They're locking the gates at each stairwell behind them. Now they're on the roof. It didn't take more than a minute before the gates to the embassy compound to come down. The crowd drove a fire truck through the front door. Now there's Marines on the roof. I'd say there's about 50. One helicopter comes in. Actually, there's more than 50. One helicopter comes in, takes a contingent. Another helicopter comes in. They're shedding their flak jackets. They're shedding their helmets. They're trying to squeeze in as many as they can. And Major Keane realizes, you know what? We're not going to get everybody out on these two helicopters, the last two helicopters.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes to Top Valdez, Master Sergeant Valdez, and he says, Top, give me 11 good men I could fight with. Or 10 good men, counting Keane. There was 11 left on the roof. And Steve Schuller was one of those men. And so there's 11 men. Helicopters are gone. It's total chaos. They hear the enemy, the North Vietnamese are coming into the city. They can hear the tanks. They can see the tanks. The crowd around the embassy has broken into the embassy, and they're clawing their way, trying to get to the roof. And there's 11 Marines sitting on the roof, wondering, watching the sun come up, and wondering, did they forget about us? Or what's going on? Are they coming back for us? And, of course, Major Keane and Top Valdez yes, they're coming back for us. Of course they're coming back for us.
Mm-hmm.
But there was doubt in everyone's mind, a little bit of doubt. And it was a scary situation. And I got to tell you, Dale, if any of your readers want to find out what happened, don't you think they have to read the book?
I think they do have to read the book. But Steve, I want to bring you back on. You were part of that 11, and you had a little ritual that you did up there. I think we can share this little story about the passing of the bottle.
The passing of the bottle. They got to a certain point where it was like you're in God's hand. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So Corporal Bauer happened to have, he was the bar NCO, he happened to have 2 bottles of Johnny Walker Scotch, one red and one black. So everybody sat around with their backs against the walls and, corked the bottles and passed them around for about I think those 2 bottles got 3, I think everybody got 3 or 4 drinks of pulls off of it, and that was it. We sat there and said, this is it.
Well, this was your Alamo moment, wasn't it?
That was the Alamo moment.
Right. This is what we're going to do. We're going to fight it out if we have to. I've got a question coming up real quick from somebody on the air. I've got Ed from Wyandotte, Michigan. Ed, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the call. Real quickly, were there other embassies that you had to coordinate with, or were there other embassies trying to get their people out, or was this just entirely a U.S. situation?
No, the Brits had evacuated a week earlier. The French had cut a separate deal with Hanoi, and I would suppose there was a Korean contingent from the Korean embassy. And they don't call the Koreans the Irish of Asia for no reason. They kind of bullied their way into the compound. They tried to get to the front of the line and tried to get on the first choppers that were coming in. Major Keane stopped that. He said to them, you're last in, you're last out. They eventually all got out. Actually, no, several of the Koreans were left behind, but most of them got out. And the other embassies had all kind of cut their separate piece with the North Vietnamese. And anyone who was our ally, such as the Brits, they were long gone.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Ed, for calling.
Welcome.
All right. So we're up on the roof. We're having this Alamo moment. Why were there delays in these helicopters coming in and out? I want you guys to get into a little bit of the bureaucracy of that real quickly. We've got a couple of minutes.
Well, I could answer that for you real quick. Is that okay. When Captain Berry's helicopter left with the ambassador on board, there was a phrase he used. The tiger is out. The tiger is out. And that was supposed to tell the 7th Fleet that the ambassador was on the helicopter and left the embassy. And that was actually interpreted also as meaning that with the ambassador was the last Marine, so that there was no one left at the embassy at all. And so there was that belief for some time that everybody was out, and no one knew that there were still those 11 Marines on the roof of the embassy. So it took a little while for that to dawn on somebody back at the fleet. Hey, wait a minute, we still got guys there, and so they had to scramble and send a helicopter back for them, and certainly hope a couple of things. Hope that those 11 Marines were still there when the helicopter arrived, and also because it took off so suddenly. What they found out while the helicopter was in the air is that it was running low on gas. So it had to get to Saigon and back, and hope that it had 11 Marines on board on the way back.
In the fluidity of the situation, Dale, the original plan, you mentioned Plan E before, Option 4. Well, Option 1, the ambassador was going to be the last man out.
Okay.
And there was a bureaucratic foul-ups, red tape. Okay, the ambassador's out. Everybody else must be out too, right? And it took them, as Tom said, it took them a while to realize. In fact, I don't know, black humor, I suppose, is the best way to describe this. Henry Kissinger actually had a press conference in Washington, and he told the press, every American who wants to be out, because there were some reporters who stayed behind, but every American who wants to be out of Saigon has been evacuated from Saigon. And he walked off the stage, and an aide whispered into his ear, no, Mr. Secretary, we still have Marines on the roof. And he went ballistic. You made me look like a fool in front of the press. And it was just indicative of the chaos.
That's true. I've also got somebody on the line here. I've got Joel from New Jersey. Joel, welcome to Veterans Radio. You got a question?
Yes. My name is Joel. I'm a disabled Air Force Vietnam veteran from Agent Orange. Two interesting points is that the current Air Force Chief of Staff, General Norton Schwartz, flew some of the last fixed-wing evacuation flights out of Tan Son Nhut, which is interesting. That's quite a career. The other interesting thing is CBS news broadcaster Betty, actually it's Nguyen, she pronounced it Nguyen. Her father and mother, her father was a Navy Vietnam veteran who stayed in Vietnam and married a Vietnamese woman as a little child. Her mother, father, and her made one of the last flights out of Saigon on an Air Force transport. And she's a well-known, she used to work for CNN. She works for CBS News. As a matter of fact, she was on this morning.
Oh, okay.
It still comes back to the present in the terms of a little girl who's now a famous news broadcaster and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Norton Schwartz.
I guess he was piloting one of those big C-130s that right before they started shelling the airport. That was Plan B. Remember? Right. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. Plan B was we're going to get everybody out on fixed wing. We're going to strip down our C-130s, and we're going to just have an assembly line of C-130s landing. But once the North Vietnamese shelled Tan Son Nhut Airport, that plan went out the window.
Right.
So,
thank you very much.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, I was talking to Steve Schuller yesterday. We were having a private conversation, and he said something like, well, it's history now. Even though it's the anniversary, it's history, and I guess everybody's forgotten it. And I don't think everybody has forgotten it. I think this American Dunkirk, so to speak, that took place 36 years ago today, I think it's relevant even today as to, A, not only MSGs we have stationed around the world in harm's way, and with what's going on in the Mideast and North Africa, but also with our planned withdrawals from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think there's a parallel. And I certainly hope we've learned something.
I think so. We got to end it right there, gentlemen. Thank you so very much for being on Veterans Radio today. Make sure you get the book, folks. Last Men Out, Bob Drury, Tom Clavin. Thank you both very much for being on Veterans Radio. Steve Schuller, thank you also. We'll be back next week with another fascinating story about Americans veterans. We will not ever let you forget. Until then, you are dismissed.
Opinions expressed on Veterans Radio reflect the views of Veterans Radio or your local station. Veterans Radio is a production of Veterans Radio, LLC.